On a warm May afternoon in Sarasota, I handed my only daughter the keys to a bayfront villa I had spent 20 years building and paying off, believing I was giving her a quiet beginning, not a battlefield. 3 weeks later, her husband arrived with 4 relatives and 3 suitcases of demands, and within days the woman who loved crossword puzzles before sunrise was washing their dishes past midnight, while he smiled like the deed, and my daughter's future, belonged to him. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. I knew he mistook my silence for surrender, but he didn't know I kept every receipt, wrote every clause myself and left a lever hidden in the gift. 1 clause, 10 days, and a $500 a day meter he couldn't stop. I'm Elaine Foster, 54, a commercial estimator who still writes in pencil. Numbers calm me. Lily, my daughter, is 26 and gentle the way my mother was, quiet, careful, hopeful. She married Evan Cole on May 14 in a small church near the bay. I wrapped the villa keys in a box under pale blue paper and tried not to cry when she lifted the lid. The villa sits at the end of Oyster Point Drive, 3 bedrooms and a studio over the garage, a dock long enough for a borrowed skiff. When I renovated it, I learned every pipe, every beam, and every rule of the Bay Palms highway. I also learned how marriages can confuse titles, so I gave the home by way of the Foster Family Living Trust. Lily was the primary beneficiary with full use for life. I kept myself as trustee. It was still a gift, just one with guardrails. Evan shook my hand that night, eyes sparkling like a man who sees a prize. His mother, Darla, hugged Lily and whispered long plans for grandchildren. I remember thinking, give them a chance, give everyone a chance. But then, 2 weeks later, Lily called at 10:47 p.m. Her voice was small. "They're moving in tomorrow," she said. I asked, "Who's they?" She answered like she was reading a list. His mom and dad, his brother Kyle, his aunt Rita, and 2 cousins for a bit, just until they get settled. My chest went cold. I parked 3 streets over the next morning and watched a procession of cars back up to the front door. Darla carried in plastic bins. Wayne rolled a toolbox. Kyle dragged a mattress straight across the hallway wood. Evan stood in the driveway with his arms spread like a ringmaster. The garage door stayed up because it wouldn't close over the stack of boxes. When I stepped inside, Lily was already at the sink with rubber gloves. "Mom," she said softly, and kept washing. Evan kissed the top of her head and told me they were consolidating resources. He was between sales jobs, he said. Family helped family. He blinked at me like he'd solved something clever. One problem, the trust instrument doesn't blink. I went home and opened the binder I'd built the winter before, tab C, occupancy. Section 6 read the same way it had read every night I checked it. Occupants limited to beneficiary and spouse, no additional adult residents beyond 14 consecutive days without trustees' written consent. In the margin I had drawn a small star. Below it, another clause. Upon non-compliance, trustee may issue notice to cure within 10 days. Failure to cure triggers a daily use fee of $500 payable to the trust until compliance. I'd written it in plain English, and had the attorney sharpen the edges. I didn't call Lily that night. She was already underwater. I needed to turn the tide without drowning her. I photographed the driveway, counted bedding rolls by the door, and saved every text where Evan bragged about finally filling the villa with good energy. Except the energy didn't pay the HOA. On June 21, I mailed a notice to cure by certified mail and posted a duplicate inside the utility closet. The letter had 2 paragraphs and no adjectives. It cited Section 6, named the additional adults, and gave them until July 1 to reduce occupancy to Lily and Evan only. I included the line I knew would hook him by the jaw. If not cured by July 1, a daily use fee of $500 will accrue to the trust, and HOA violations will be referred to Bay Palms for enforcement. Evan sent me a text that night. Cute letter. Lily lives here. We're family. I didn't answer. I documented. By June 25, 5 toothbrushes stood in 1 cup. Darla ran the living room like a station chief, assigning Lily tasks with a sweet tone that sounded like a chain. "Could you make chai? Could you iron Wayne's shirts?" Lily agreed to all of it. She stopped taking her morning walks around the bay. She stopped reading in the hammock. She started whispering. Kyle set up shop in the studio over the garage and invited friends to play cards. The music was not loud, but it was constant. Aunt Rita hung a framed cross-stitch over the thermostat like it was theirs to decorate. Evan told everyone to ignore trust drama because I wouldn't go after my own child. Until the HOA manager, a measured woman named Beatrice, called him. She had received my occupancy report and 2 neighbor complaints about parking. "We need a guest list," she said, "and a date when they'll be gone." He told her there was no date. Beatrice scheduled a hearing for July 12 and noted the possible $250 per day community fine for sustained violations after a written warning. I didn't celebrate, I just added it to my binder under Tab H, third-party pressure. On July 1st, the cure period ended. I arrived at 9 in the morning with my copy of the trust, a camera, and a box of croissants. Lily opened the door. Her hair was tucked under a scarf, and her eyes looked thinner. I hugged her and asked quietly, "Do you want them here?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Evan walked in, wiped one croissant with his finger like he owned the butter, and smiled. "Timer's up," he said, mocking. "You wrote your little clock," I told him, calm as a ruler, that the daily fee began that day and would continue until compliance. He laughed. "Try collecting," he said. "Ask your daughter." I didn't say the next part out loud because it wasn't for him. Fees were payable by occupant responsible for violation, not the beneficiary. I'd written that on a particularly cold December evening, when the wind rattled the screens and I pictured a man exactly like him. On July 2nd, I opened a separate trust ledger, titled Use Fees, Cole. On July 3rd, I filed a non-emergency request with City Code Enforcement about illegal boarding in a single-family residence. I uploaded photos of multiple bedding arrangements and a stack of lawn chairs that blocked the side egress. On July 5th, a city inspector named Armand left a yellow notice on the gate requesting access and reminding them of occupancy and egress rules. The letter said non-compliance could lead to a $200 per day municipal penalty after a re-inspection. Evan crumpled it on the patio. That night, Lily called me from the walk-in closet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought it would feel like family. It's like I don't live in my own house." I said, "You live in my heart. The house is just the stage. We can change the scenery." She cried, and then she breathed slow, the way I taught her when she was 6. On July 7, I met with a real estate attorney named Andrea on Main Street. Her retainer was $8,200, and I wrote the check without blinking because decisions feel cheaper than fear. We walked through the trust, the notice, the deadlines, and the upcoming HOA hearing. She nodded at the simple language. "You wrote this?" she asked. I said yes. "Good," she said. "Then you can testify to intent." Andrea prepared a packet, the trust clauses, my certified mail receipts, Lily's texts about assigned chores, Beatrice's hearing notice, the city's inspection request, and the ledger showing $500 per day beginning July 1st. She told me to be ready for 2 maneuvers. They'd call me controlling, and they'd try to drape themselves in cultural expectations. We would keep it on paper and policy. On July 9th, Evan tried a different tack. He took Lily's phone at dinner and sent me a message from her number. "Mom, please stop. You're making it worse." The spelling didn't sound like her. I drove over. I stayed parked. I watched Evan step onto the porch and tell Wayne he would get the title cleaned up so no one could pull stunts. Except the title didn't need cleaning. It needed reading, so I made sure his curiosity found bait. On July 10th, I left a copy of the recorded trust memorandum and the HOA bylaws in the kitchen drawer where Kyle liked to hunt for batteries. I highlighted the words separate property and no assignment and beneficial use, not fee simple. Later, I saw Evan at the dining table with Darla and Wayne, flipping the pages back and forth like a man mapping a maze he thought was a hallway. He had that smile again, but smaller. The city inspector returned July 11th at 9:15 a.m. He photographed the mattresses, the blocked egress, and the garage overloaded with boxes touching the water heater. He gave a written compliance date of July 14th. "Fix this by Friday," he said, "or we start the daily penalties." Evan told him, "We're almost out." He lied. The HOA hearing took place July 12th in a beige room with stackable chairs. Beatrice sat at the end of a folding table. Next to her were 2 board members, a pen jar, and a stack of rules that never apologize for existing. Evan arrived in a polo and said the community should be welcoming of extended family. Beatrice read the parking rule and the occupancy limit. "We are," she said. "But rules keep neighbors from colliding." I presented my packet. Andrea asked Evan if he had my written consent for extra adults. He said, "We didn't think it applied." The board issued a written warning with a $250 per day fine beginning July 15 if the extra adults remained. Beatrice slid the decision across the table like a check. Evan walked out furious, then performed calm. In the parking lot, he told Lily that I was trying to shrink her life. She stood between us like the hinge on a heavy door. I asked her a question that could fit only one truth. Do you feel respected in that house? She looked at the asphalt and shook her head. That night, she slept at my bungalow 2 neighborhoods inland. She brought a small duffel and sat on the couch in my old college sweatshirt. She told me Darla had started handing her lists each morning. Floors, bathrooms, lunches, laundry, dinner prep. Evan says this is how families do it, she whispered. But we never did it like this. I poured tea and passed her the lemon slices. I didn't say anything about cultures or customs. I said, you deserve a home, not a post. On July 13th, Evan sent my daughter a 2-page text that looked like a contract. He wrote that marriage meant shared assets and that I had no right to interfere. I forwarded it to Andrea. She underlined 3 lines and wrote in the margin, admits knowledge of trust, attempts to coerce beneficiary. Then she drafted a settlement offer to serve at Friday's RE inspection, where the city would clock compliance. The offer was simple. All adults not named Lily or Evan vacate by July 17th at 5 p.m. The Cole family pays the trust $8,000 in accrued use fees through July 16 and reimburses $1,750 for HOA parking citations. Already issued, the HOA per-day fines stop on July 17 upon inspection. Each party signs a no-harassment agreement, and, most important, Evan signs an acknowledgement that the villa is Lily's separate property through the trust with no marital claim. Evan laughed when I hand-delivered the offer on the 14th. You don't get to tell us whose family, he said. I told him the trust did. He tore the packet in half and let the pieces drift onto the foyer rug. I took a photo of the paper on the floor. Paper tells stories when people won't. At 3 p.m. that afternoon, Andrea called. He's trying to shop a refinance, she said. A junior loan officer she knew had seen an inquiry that made no sense, a would-be cash-out using owner's affidavit and a typed marital joinder. The villa wasn't even mortgage-free for that purpose, it was trust property. Andrea sent a cease and desist to the broker and CC'd Evan. The attempt burned whatever patience I had left. On July 15th, the HOA fines started, $250 a day. On July 16th, the city clocked non-compliance and posted a notice for $200 per day. My ledger added $500 per day to the trust. The meter wasn't crushing, it was clarifying. Choices had prices now. That evening, Lily stood in the kitchen while Darla critiqued her slicing onions. Lily put the knife down and stepped away. I'm going to my mother's, she said. Evan blocked the doorway. You're not leaving, he said softly, like a threat warmed to room temperature. She looked up at the camera doorbell I had installed during renovations and said, clearly, please move. He didn't. She raised her phone and started recording. He stepped aside. She arrived at my place with 2 suitcases and a shoebox of photos. We made up the guest room. She slept 10 hours and woke with eyes less thin. The city re-inspection came on Friday, July 17th at 10 a.m. Armand walked through with a clipboard. The extra mattresses were still airing on the studio floor. Boxes still crowded the garage. 2 cars still nested in the landscaping. He wrote the penalty start date. Evan followed him, complaining. Armand nodded without listening. That afternoon, Andrea filed a petition in circuit court seeking an injunction against continued violations of the trust terms and a writ granting the trustee, me, access to ensure compliance and safety. She attached the ledger, the HOA decision, and the city notices. Paper makes strange music when stacked correctly. At 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the settlement deadline, Evan texted, "We're reviewing with counsel." At 5:01 p.m., I switched the ledger column header from proposed settlement to accrued. At 5:07 p.m., Darla called Lily and said I was ruining a family. Lily said one sentence so simple it broke a spell. I am part of the family, you keep forgetting. Monday came with a new sound, a process server's knock. Evan opened the door to a man who handed him 2 envelopes, the injunction petition and a notice of emergency hearing set for July 21st at 9 a.m. Andrea chose that date because the calendar had space and because time itself can be a tactic. July 21st, courtroom 4B smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. The judge wore the face of a woman who had seen every kind of avoidable mess. Andrea spoke in verbs, gave, reserved, noticed, posted, inspected, fined, refused. Evan's attorney tried adjectives, unfair, controlling, cultural. The judge lifted her hand and asked a single question that drained the room. Who owns this property? Andrea pointed to the trust. Who sets the conditions of occupancy under the trust? Andrea pointed to Section 6. The judge read it twice. She then asked Evan's attorney, Do your clients have written consent to reside there? He said no. Far across the gallery, Darla's jewelry jingled like a tiny bell silenced. The judge signed a temporary injunction on the spot. Her order required, in plain script, that all adults not named Lily or Evan vacate by July 24th at 6 p.m., prohibited interference with Lily's access, directed compliance with city egress rules, and reserved jurisdiction over fees and damages. She told Evan, You may love your family without moving them into a home governed by terms you agreed to by living there. Paper doesn't raise its voice, it doesn't have to. Wayne moved out first, hauling the toolbox back to his pickup truck like it had grown heavier. Kyle left a day later, eyes narrow, carrying cards in a tin. Aunt Rita took down the cross-stitch quietly. Darla lingered, folding linens into perfect rectangles and placing them in a shallow box as if folding the logic of the world itself. She looked at Lily and said, You will miss this, Lily answered, Not the way you think. On July 24th at 6 p.m., the house looked oddly larger. The air had room. Armand returned on the 25th and cleared the violations. Beatrice ended the HOA fines and issued a final statement, $2,500 owed for 10 days of non-compliance after the warning. The city's administrative penalty totaled $800 for 4 days. My trust ledger showed $8,000 in use fees from July 1st through July 16, and then, after the injunction, $1,000 for July 17th and 18. Those days when Evan still allowed relatives to stay just overnight. The amounts were not vengeance, they were arithmetic. Andrea scheduled a compliance conference for July 29th. Evan arrived alone, face smaller, smile gone. He signed a stipulation acknowledging the villa as Lily's separate property held in trust, waiving any claim. He agreed to pay the HOA and city penalties and reimburse the trust the $9,000 ledgered in use fees within 30 days. He also signed the no harassment agreement and an addendum that if any adult other than Lily or a minor child resided more than 14 days without written consent, a $1,000 per day fee would begin automatically. He didn't argue. He just asked, Will Lily come home? I said she was already home, where she was respected, but then the mid-roll storm I hadn't expected arrived. Lily sat me down in late August, placed her hands flat on the table, and said, I'm late. She looked both scared and soft, like a woman standing in 2 doorways at once. We drove to her doctor in a strip mall clinic, where a nurse with kind eyes said, Congratulations. I watched Lily swallow, then smile, then cry. The baby changed the math of everything. Evan started texting again, promising change. He took a job selling HVAC service plans for a company off Tamiami Trail. He sent photos of a cleaned garage and a chore chart where his name finally appeared. It was effort, but effort is not character. Lily told him she would consider counseling. He booked sessions. He arrived on time. He kept his eyes on the carpet and said he wanted to be better. For a few weeks he was. Then in September he tried to add his name to the Wi-Fi account and told the provider he was homeowner. The request bounced because the account belonged to the trust. It was small, but it wasn't small. Small tells are still tells. In October, he asked to host his family just for Thanksgiving week. Lily looked at the calendar, looked at me, and shook her head. We'll have a quiet dinner, she said. He said families were supposed to be together. She said, We are a family. He stared at the water and exhaled hard. You chose her, he said. Lily replied, I choose me. That night he slept at his brother's place. By choice, he said. Choice is a useful word. On November 3rd, he sent a long message again. It was softer, threaded with apologies. He wanted to come home. He asked to reset the story. Lily wrote back one line, Respect is the story. He arrived the next day with flowers and a quiet face. For a while the villa held. Peace can be a tightrope that looks like a boardwalk. January brought the baby's heartbeat. A quick flutter on an ultrasound screen that made the nurse smile. It made Evan cry. He held Lily's hand and kissed her knuckles. For a week he cooked dinner and folded sheets and asked her opinion before moving anything. But then, he asked Lily to sign a joint credit card to build points. She declined until after the baby. He raised his voice. She walked outside and called me from the dock. Her words were simple. I want to raise this child in a home where decisions aren't fights. I told her I would back whatever she chose. In February, she met with a family counselor on her own, and then with a lawyer specializing in collaborative divorce. Florida doesn't require cruelty to justify an exit, it just requires clarity. On March 12th, she told Evan she wanted separation. He said I had poisoned her. She said the trust hadn't poisoned anything, it had preserved options. He slammed a cabinet door and left a crack like a fork of lightning. He returned later with contrition and glue. The crack stayed. We signed a temporary separation agreement in April. Evan moved to an apartment off Bahia Vista Road with a 6-month lease. He agreed to pay his own expenses and contribute a set amount toward baby costs. He also reaffirmed, in writing, the separate property status of the villa and the no harassment terms. Andrea slid the paper toward him. He signed and didn't meet my eyes. Lily and I painted the nursery a pale green that looked like early morning. We assembled a crib and argued cheerfully over where to place the rocking chair. We kept the house simple, no guests longer than a weekend. Friends over for short afternoons, doors open to air, windows clean. The villa sounded different without the drag of someone else's expectation. In July, Clara Elaine Cole arrived at 3:19 p.m., 7 pounds 8 ounces, with a small dimple that felt like time leaving a thumbprint. Evan was there. He held Clara, wept, and promised every promise his lips could shape. Some promises kept. He took night feedings when he stayed over in the guest room. He fetched groceries and remembered who liked which yogurt. Some promises frayed. He wanted his mother to help. Lily told him help wasn't a person if the price was peace. By September, they filed for divorce using the collaborative process. They disagreed on very little. He kept his apartment and his car. She kept the villa in trust and the small sedan I bought her used. They split child costs by percentage written in ink. They signed a parenting plan that protected Clara first. The court approved it in November, a few days before Thanksgiving, the holiday that once threatened to pry the house back open. On the first Thanksgiving, in the quiet villa, we set 3 plates, one for me, one for Lily, one for Clara's bottle and future teeth. We ate on the patio, watching pelicans practice their dives. Do you think I failed at marriage? Lily asked. I shook my head. I think you succeeded at your life, I said. She laughed softly and fed Clara. The house looked like it had finally exhaled. Evan sees Clara twice a week and some Sundays. He shows up, brings tiny shoes, and sometimes tells jokes that still make Lily smile because muscle memory takes time to relearn. He keeps his family visits at the playground now. He doesn't bring them to the villa. He knows better. And not just because of the paper. As for the ledger, he paid the $9,000 in use fees within the 30 days the stipulation required. He also paid the $2,500 HOA penalties and the $800 city fines, after a payment plan Beatrice authorized. I covered the attorney retainer because protecting a daughter is not a bill, it's a reflex. The trust sits quiet again, a guardian you only hear when doors rattle. Sometimes I walk the dock at sunset and remember Evan's smile the afternoon he performed lordship in the driveway. I remember the clatter of boxes and the bright sound of a woman pretending exhaustion is normal. I remember thinking how long a smile can last when it grows on someone else's property. It lasted until the first notice. It lasted until the yellow tag on the gate. It lasted until the judge's pen found paper and wrote a different story. Lily likes to tease me that I won the war with office supplies. Maybe that's true. I measured, I documented, I mailed, I filed, I showed up. I didn't throw a punch. I opened a binder. And when the clock I'd written into the gift finally chimed, it didn't ring in triumph, it rang in relief. I gave my daughter a home and a lever. He thought the gift was the house, the lever was the part he couldn't see. When I look at Clara sleeping under the pale green ceiling, I think about how some smiles bloom fast and die faster, and how the right kind of love, quiet, patient, written down, outlives them.